It's too much. It's here for we're talking from your office. Which office? That's everybody's office.
That's probably mine.
You need it or not? Maybe that's Fred's.
It's probably mine. Is it going to show up in the musalla? No. Yeah. I don't know. I don't think if anybody's there. Or should I put it in my jacket? I'm fine either way. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala Sayyidil Anbiya wa Mursaleen. Nabiyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Can you just click on the presentation? All right, perfect. So last time we had spoken about the importance and the authority of the Sunnah of Ijma and how to establish the authority of it. And we said that some of the problems that involve or go around Ijma or the discussion of Ijma is what? Okay, it is consensus. That's what Ijma is. So how do we prove that Ijma is a tool in the Sharia? How do we prove that it is a source of the Sharia? So the Quran we spoke about very quickly. If we review, why is the Quran a source in the Sharia? Because it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once it's established that it's from Allah, then it becomes a source that we can use to establish rulings in Islam. Like after the Quran, what is the second source in the Sharia? The Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How do we establish the authority of the Sunnah? I use the Quran, number one, right? Because once you see the logic that's happening here. So once you establish that Allah is there and that He's one and that He sent the Quran, now you establish the divinity of the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And now you can say, because it's divine, I'm going to use it as a source. Right? I'm going to use it as a source, and I'm going to be able to derive rulings and understandings and beliefs from this book. The second source is Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So now I have to use one of the sources that I've already established, right? So if there's a source I've already established, I can now use that to move forward and define that and utilize that as a source in the Sharia. So we said that the Sunnah is the second source. And why is the Sunnah a second source? Because the Quran says that it's the source. And those people who attack the Sunnah, what are some of the responses that they have? Or what are some of the reasons they have saying that the Sunnah is not an authority? Okay, you have in general two groups of people or two types of people.
Skeptics, so they doubt the authenticity of
Oh, okay. So you have those who have the doubts about how it's reached us, right? So they doubt the historicity of it. And then the second group. Okay, those are the proofs that they use, right? But those proofs, what do they use them to mean? That the Quran is comprehensive in and of itself, and that you do not need the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And when you say that you don't need the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and obviously the result of that is that you don't need the Hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, what is a very simple response to that?
there's just so many things that aren't explicitly like zakat.
Yeah. Sure. So there are a lot of things that just aren't explicit in the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and not just that, when you utilize these three verses, what happens? You're ignoring the rest, right? So you're actually taking those verses in a vacuum, but you can't do that. You have to take those verses in line with other ones. So once you take those as a whole, it becomes very easy to deal with and it becomes very easy to understand. So the last one was Ijma, and we said Ijma is a legal consensus, right? It's a consensus of scholars. And it's kind of this abstract idea, because what does consensus mean? What does it mean to come together? How do you establish whether or not Ijma actually happened on an issue? Is Ijma limited to a particular time? Is it limited to a particular place? What is the role of Ijma in relation to the Quran and the Sunnah? Can Ijma abrogate the Quran and the Sunnah? What do you think? No? Yes? Okay. All right. For those who say yes, why? But, all right, so the slavery issue is, has it been abolished legally in terms of man-made laws, or has it been abolished in the Sharia? So now, for example, if slavery came back, for whatever reason, would Islam prohibit it? No. So there's no ijma. You can't say there's consensus on that. Are there harms in it? Yeah, absolutely, right? There's harms in a lot of things, but would Islam actually categorically come and remove it? No. We had said this before. Did Islam invent war? No. Did it invent marriage? No, right? It didn't invent divorce. It didn't invent slavery. It came to bring a structure to all of those systems to minimize the oppression that's in them. Same with capital and corporal punishment. So, which leads me back to the initial question. Does Ijma abrogate? Yes. Abdul Razak's thinking.
I don't know if this is an abrogation. I think there are some times when by Ijma, scholars agree not to act on it. I think.
Okay.
So I'm not sure what to call that.
Okay, so no, that's a good example. So you have a hadith, right? You have narrations where many of the scholars will say laysa alayhi al-amr, right? We don't act on this hadith. One example of this is the hadith of Ibn Maktum. I don't know if you guys are familiar. What is unique about Ibn Maktum? Right, he was blind. So you have a hadith of the Prophet where he came to the Prophet, he said, "Do I need to go to the masjid to pray?" And the Prophet initially he said to him, what? He said no. And then he stopped and he said, "Atasma an-nida? Do you hear the adhan?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "Then you have to go." Imam al-Tirmidhi, the one who narrates this hadith, he mentions in the hadith after, he said, we don't act on this hadith. Why? How can you just ignore a hadith? He's not saying it's not sound. He's not saying it's problematic. He's just saying you don't act on it. And he's not the only one, right? There are scholars who are around them who said like, no, this is not a hadith you act on. And the reason, wallahu alam, is because there's context there that we're just not aware of. And we have so many other hadith that actually contradict this one. Now, what are some of those ahadith that would contradict this one? I'm sorry? Is somebody talking to me? No, okay. So I won't say contradict, I would say oppose. Oppose is a better term. Yeah. Follow, yeah, Uthman. So this hadith, I can't call it shadh because the reason is that it's not opposing other hadith directly in the sense where the Prophet ﷺ is saying that it is an obligation for you, therefore it is an obligation for everyone. So the takhsis, right, the fact that he ﷺ specified Ibn Maktum, it makes it a very specific fatwa, right? And the fact that the Prophet ﷺ never said this to anyone else also shows that there's some issue here, there's a problem here. What is the ruling on praying in Salat al-Jama'ah? So praying in congregation, the 5 daily prayers is what? It's mustahab, it's recommended. It's recommended. Except for who? Which madhab says that it's an obligation to pray, not in the masjid, but in Jama'ah? So the Hanbalis say that's an obligation to pray in Jama'ah, in obligation, but they don't say it's an obligation to pray in the masjid. So if we understand that it is not an obligation to pray in the masjid, how is it possible that Ibn Maktum, who was blind, clearly had an excuse that he was ordered to go to the masjid? And this is where the scholars say there has to be some context there. There's something in this story that's missing. There's not enough information here for us to actually understand how to apply this hadith. But there's no abrogation here. Yeah, it's how to understand something, and this is a better. It's a good application of Ijma. I agree with that, but it's not a good example of naskh, of abrogation. Yeah, no. I feel it's actually an excellent case study. It's an excellent case study for and not just in terms of ijma, but also in terms of for hadith, there are context, right? There has to be context, otherwise it's not possible to understand. So do you guys have you come to a conclusion that ijma can abrogate or not? No, it can't, right? Ijma can't abrogate. Why? Because we said that ijma is within the confines of what? It's in the confines of the Kitab and Sunnah. It's not going to go outside of it. You'll never have it coming and opposing or going outside of it. It's always going to be within those boundaries. So if the Kitab and Sunnah is an umbrella, under that umbrella would be ijma. Tafadhal.
What do you say about the case
So this is a good this is also a good case study, but this is less an issue of ijma. So because Umar, he did a few things during his khilafah that were very unique to him. So for example, the ghanima, the war booty, what did he do with the land that was conquered? Do you guys know? He didn't give it to any of the soldiers. He gave it to who? He gave it to the companions to oversee. And the reason he did that is because he felt that they would be more just in the distribution and the use of the land than these people who just came into Islam. He said that he felt that these new people would actually consume it for themselves. The marrying the kitabi, marrying the non-Muslim, marrying the male or female, marrying the female Jewish or the Christian. During the time of Umar, what happened? He forbade it. He didn't allow it. The stealing was like the punishment for stealing was suspended. For making umrah outside, like so he radiallahu anh, he said during Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and Dhul Hijjah, you were not allowed to make umrah. And I'm just going to give specific examples of each of these, but it's a good case study. Ibn Umar, he went to his father and he said, how can you forbid something that the Prophet ﷺ did? Because the Prophet ﷺ, how many umrahs did he make? You guys know in his lifetime? He made 4, right? He made 4 umrahs, all of them in Shawwal. All of them in Shawwal. Shawwal, what is unique about Shawwal, Dhul Qa'dah, and Dhul Hijjah? Man, we need to step up our education a little bit. It's from the Ashur al-Hajj. That these are the months you can take ihram in, right? So you can take ihram in Shawwal, you can take ihram in Dhul Qa'dah, you can take ihram in Dhul Hijjah to make Hajj, right? That's what's unique about that. I cannot take ihram for Hajj in Ramadan, for example. I can't do that because it's not min Ashur al-Hajj. It's not from the months of Hajj. So Ibn Umar, he challenged his father. He said, how can you forbid something that the Prophet ﷺ did himself? I'm going to make Umrah in Shawwal. So the question then comes, were these religious commandments or were they recommendations? Right, that's the first question. The second one, the suspension of the hudud. What does that tell us? Hudud, corporal punishment. So the suspension of corporal punishment, what can we benefit and what can we learn from that?
There was a context of a specific time and place.
Okay, so it gives us a little bit of room for context. What kind of room can I, or what kind of wiggle room can I have with hudud? Or how does this help me understand corporal punishment better? Right, it's for a common good, right? So if we say all of the laws of the Sharia, they came for a common good. There's no doubt about that. But the question here comes, because Umar, he was able to, he felt that he had this wiggle room, and none of the companions opposed it. None of the companions said like, no, this needs to be implemented. So that gives us context, it gives us understanding to what now? Something I want you guys to think about. It's important because these are historical events that we're aware of, but how do we deal with them? How does it help us understand Islam? How does it help us understand corporal punishment? Yeah.
If we we need to approach like a bigger goal.
Okay.
Keep in mind bigger goal.
Right, so there are bigger goals that we need to keep in mind, for sure. I agree with that 100%. But not just that, many times the application. Here, what is the purpose? And maybe this might lead us to the qiyas discussion today, right? What is the purpose of corporal punishment?
Deter crime.
To deter crime, very simply. It is to deter crime. But if everybody is doing something, or if there is something that is pushing people to do something, what is going to happen? Right? You can now start finding excuses and looking at excuses for people. But does this now extend to capital punishment? Can there be a time where I can excuse murder? Something to think about, right? Huh? You what? Oh, so I mean, those are absolute exceptions, right? Those are absolute exceptions in every single case. Or يعني قتل الخطأ. يعني for example, if I accidentally, what do you call it? Is that second degree murder? Not manslaughter is where you intend it. Where's the one where it's unintentional? It's manslaughter? Okay. Involuntary manslaughter. Insanity. I mean, yeah, there are always those cases. But even in insanity, what would happen is that you would pay, the family would have to pay blood money, right? So there's always going to be consequences. But in those specific cases, right, where it's involuntary or it's self-defense, here the capital punishment doesn't apply, right? It won't apply in those situations. But the question then comes, so then we understand that in this situation, these are absolute exceptions. I'm talking about, would there be a time frame, or would there be some type of societal pressure that would ease the punishment for murder?
Not ease, but replace murder, replace capital punishment with other kind of punishment.
Okay. So like life in prison, you think life in prison is a reasonable substitute? Oh, we're getting,
It's debatable.
we're getting into edgy territory now.
It's debatable.
Sure. Okay, so that discussion actually goes back to, remember the tazkiyah discussion that we had, where we talked about where, in what situations is it okay to lie? So I think that's more of that, but it's tough, right? It's tough, and you do have a lot of modern pushback, right? You have a lot of modern pushback, especially with the group of people that are very maqasid focused. I don't know if you guys are aware of them, but these are the individuals who say that capital and corporal punishment needs to be removed, that hijab is not a part of Islam, right? You know, so you have a big push for this type of thought, and you have a big push for this type. Why? Because they say that Islam's greater goals are these 5, and these things don't fulfill any of those particular goals. And because those goals aren't fulfilled, therefore they are not necessary. I don't, you guys familiar with this at all? No? Yes, no, maybe, okay. I think but anyway, yeah, if you guys, you can find it. Like, it's really not that difficult. You find people claiming all sides of stuff, and these people they're Muslims, right? But this is what they claim, and this is what they say. Why are we talking about this? Where did I get to? Oh, yes, abrogation. So over here, this isn't abrogation, it's more application, right? So it gives us an idea on when and where we can apply these rules, how much room we have to play with those rules. But when it comes to all of these situations, for drinking, if anybody had an excuse for people who were for drinking, it would be the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? Because alcohol abuse was the strongest during his khilafah. I mean, during his messengership. And then Abu Bakr and Umar, if there was like a graph of, alcoholism, it was like this, I mean, but over here, the highest was during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and then obviously it started going down. People still suffered from it, right? Substance abuse was still a problem in the early, and even today, right? People try to act like alcohol abuse isn't a problem, in the Muslim community, and it is. It's still a problem, it's still an issue. I think it's important for all centers to have substance abuse counseling and substance abuse, like seminars and these type of things. I think they're very helpful. I think they're very healthy because many times they're representative of a bigger problem or a bigger issue. So you don't find the Prophet ﷺ having the same laxity with people who abuse alcohol, right? This is not something that was found. So we can see that there are specific cases where you have room within the Sharia to delay application of something or to remove application of something. But does that mean that the rule is removed absolutely? No, right? So there could be exceptions on at this time, we will suspend, like when the poverty level of the population falls below X amount, at this point, we cannot implement stealing laws. And do we find this even in modern society? We do. So in California now, what has happened? They've raised the theft limit. You guys know what the theft limit is? It's basically if you steal up to or above a certain amount, or up to a certain amount, it is not considered theft and the police aren't going to come out. And what happens is when you raise that theft limit, it's happening a lot now. Like unfortunately, it's instead of discouraging crime, it's encouraging more. So when you increase that theft limit, what happens? Huh? Right, there's less punishment, right? So you're creating a window for less people to be punished or less people to put in jail. And what happens is that if you increase that threshold, it allows the police to do what? Right, to focus on more problems within the society, whatever the case might be. And so again, there are practical applications for this, and there are times where we can see, that Umar radiallahu anhu, he allowed that room and he allowed that space. So that means that there is room and that there is space, and that's what we can benefit from it. Yes.
I just wanted to say that petty theft also is getting the black brown community more. So
Okay.
with that, it also allows.
All right, that's a longer political discussion, and everybody has their own viewpoints concerning on why it's happening. And is it targeting more communities other than others? Yeah, I believe it is. It is for sure. The question is why, right? Is it because of societal pressure? Is it because there's a cultural backwardness that needs to be addressed, right? And these are things that are always, like, people are always going to fight over these things, and that's really the political dilemma behind it. How do we deal with it? You're going to have different schools on how to deal with it and how to approach it. So we said that this was the meaning of Ijma, and we said that it's a very abstract type concept, and we said that some of the ways that it is established is through certain hadith, right? So we said, certain verses and certain hadith. And we said in those verses, like, وَمَن يُشَاقِقِ الرَّسُولَ مِن بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى فَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Over here, in those who turn away from the ways of the believers, this is a proof for the authority of Ijma. The Prophet ﷺ, he talked about his ummah, right? لَا يَجْتَمِعُ أُمَّتِي عَلَى الضَّلَالِ, that my ummah will not gather upon misguidance. What did we say is the problem with these verses and these ahadith? Why can't we use those as a proof for the authority of Ijma? I'm sorry? So the authenticity can be disputed for some of these ahadith. I agree with that. But what about the verses? Okay. Huh? They're vague. So over here, Imam Haramain, he has a really interesting argument. He says that basically that it's possible these verses mean something else. And that's it. That's all he says. Why is that a strong argument? Okay, just from a logical perspective. Basically, he says it's possible these verses mean something else. In the moment I bring a possibility to these verses meaning something else, what happens? I can't use it as a proof anymore. Why? Because the possibility exists. And so there's a possibility that these verses don't mean what you intend. And that's all he says. He doesn't bring proofs that, okay, this is why it doesn't mean that, blah, blah. He's like, no, there's a possibility it means something else. That's it. He says, as long as there's possibility, and there's a qaida, right? There's a principle in the community, in the scholarly community, that's called إِذَا حَضَرَ الْإِحْتِمَالِ بَطَلَ إِسْتِدْلَالِ. that as the moment I bring a possible meaning into a situation, you can no longer use this as a concrete proof. So that's his argument. Yes.
You basically switch the proof of birth and transfer the
Yeah. He transferred the proof of birth, which is an excellent strategy, right? One of the strategies is like, okay, you need to prove to me without a shadow of a doubt, this is the only meaning. Simple. He's like, you can't? Okay. It's not a proof.
I mean, it could be a group. I mean, a lot of scholars dispute about a particular group, what it means.
Sure. So over here, there's a difference between using a proof to establish a ruling and using a proof to establish a source of the Sharia. It better be crystal clear.
Well, it's one of several different groups, so it's not like a group of evidence.
I agree with you 100%. He's just saying, because he believes in Ijma, right? He's a proponent of it. He's just saying that none of these are a proof. Like these aren't valid. So what does he use? And these are the verses that I shared last time. These are hadith. He says that the fact that it exists is a reason, right? The fact that there is ijma, that in itself is a reason. Like historically is something that's established. Like the 5 daily prayers. I remember one of the brothers was saying, no, there's a difference of opinion on 5 daily prayers. I've never heard this before. The only difference that I'm aware. Oh, you're joking? Okay, alhamdulillah. I was like, man, I need to talk to Abdul Razak after class about like who are these people who are claiming an additional prayer. The only ones that might go against this, and because I actually thought about this for a long time, like, dang it, who is he talking about? Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's fine. But, I mean, it's still part of Isha, so it's not a big deal. The only clear opponents to this, I would say, are the Shia. And how many times do they pray in general? They pray 3 times. But what's the caveat to that? They combine, right? They still believe in 5 prayers. The only thing is that they're combining Dhuhr and Asr at Dhuhr time, and they combine Maghrib and Isha at Maghrib time, but they still essentially and fundamentally believe that the number of prayers is 5.
Do they say 8 rak'ah?
Yes, so they pray 4 and 4. They don't shorten. They pray the complete prayer. It's different. Yeah. So what happens is, like, you know the adhkar that we make, like the dhikr we make during prayer, like subhanallah, subhanallah rabbil azim, subhanallah rabbil a'la, all these, the imam does it out loud. Huh? So I mean, it's like cruise control, right? The imam's doing everything for you, like the recitation, the adhkar, blah, blah, blah. You're just, what I mean? You're just following whatever he's got going for you. So that's one of the main differences between the prayers. They do taslim, but they also do like, I don't even know what it is, man. Like, yeah, they hit their thighs 3 times, but I forgot what the meaning is and why they do it. And they use a rock, right? Yeah. So they do that during the adhan. Yeah, they don't read long. Yeah, their recitation is really short. It's not, they don't read a lot. But I mean, it depends on, even Sunnis, it depends on the masjid you go to. So I said one of the issues that, or one of the contentions that can be said with Juwayni is that basically he's saying that Ijma is proved with Ijma. He's like, okay, well, people came together and this is something that's happened, therefore it must be true. And like I said last time, I don't think the argument in and of itself is extremely problematic. I think it needs to be explored a little bit better so that we get a better understanding of what Ijma actually is. It's circular reasoning, right? So the proof for Ijma is Ijma. I think so what are some proofs that you guys can think of? Why should I use Ijma as an authority? Why is consensus an authority?
So you could say so many people could not have agree on something or other.
Right, and that's it's a very rational
It
argument.
doesn't necessarily right, but
Sure.
very probable is right.
Okay,
Probable.
so I would say that there are two very good arguments, rational arguments for ijma, and part of them is this, what Nazim mentioned. He said, how's it possible that you have so many different people with so many different motivations? Think about that, right? You have people with different motivations, people with different methods of understanding, right? Remember how we talked about like the different types of adillah, the different type of proofs that people use? How is it possible that I'm coming this way, he's coming this way, this person's coming that way, this person's coming this way, and they all come to the same exact conclusion, right? What is the probability of that happening? I think it's very reasonable. It's a very reasonable argument. Yes. Anything else? I'm sorry? Okay, qawl rajih is a little bit different. So the ijma helps us with the qawl rajih, right? So where does ijma come in practically? If I have consensus on issue, how does it help me practically, Islamically? اسمع ايش؟ اتباع التابعين نشوف فيهم. لان اجماع يعني انا استفيد منه كيف يعني؟ تطبيقا. How does it help me as a Muslim?
You know that thing.
Right, I know that not just that thing, but it helps me with what? So the fact that there is a backing of a consensual backing, right? Not just like, oh, you know, this and that. There's a consensual backing behind a particular issue. It gives me confidence in that issue, for sure. I agree with that 100%. What else?
There's so many different hadiths
Mhm.
and statements of the companions.
Yeah.
Even if each one of them individually might not be strong,
Yeah.
add up together, it adds up to all the different.
Okay, so when we talk about the opinions of the companions and tawatur and how to deal with those things, yeah. Okay. Okay, here, look, do you mind if I express that a little bit differently? So it's the one great tool or one great reason behind it, it gives us certainty and understanding, right? So if there's different ways to understand something, if I have ijma, if I have consensus, now I know for sure that this is the way to understand it. So when the Prophet ﷺ talks about the prayer times, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions them, yes, okay, yeah, or there are 5 prayers, but now I have ijma, meaning that nobody took away a different understanding from this. And that gives me confidence in how to understand sometimes narrations and sometimes the hadith. I think that's very strong. So we have one good rational argument, which I think is great. What is another rational argument, or how else can I benefit? Or give me another supporting reason of why this, by ijma, why consensus is has practical utility, or why is it a proof in and of itself? Okay, so I think you got this part of what I was looking for. Since I have boundaries, right? I have the Quran and the Sunnah. What does that help me with ijma? Right. So now you actually have a driving force, right? There's something that's pushing everybody to a particular understanding. And if you're pushing people toward a particular understanding, this increases the probability of having one understanding behind it. So in Allah's best, I think this is a very reasonable way of actually understanding and dealing with ijma. So over here, what are some things that I mentioned? It's the ijma helps me determine on whether this is a concrete proof or not. Because if I have ijma behind it, what does that mean? That there's no khilaf, right? This is a proof in and of itself. It can also help me with if there's a probability behind that proof. If that proof isn't as strong, if I have ijma behind it, what happens to the strength of the proof? It increases. Also, it helps me with if I understand that there's a particular issue and 1, 2, 3 generations passes and nobody else has gone against it, Now I can say with confidence, well, if there was a problem with this, enough time has passed for somebody to say something about that particular issue. And we're going to talk about some of those issues. And because, like Nazim was saying, this shouldn't rationally be possible. It's not possible that you have so many different people. Some people have political motives, some people have religious motives, some people have personal motives. How is it possible they all came to agreement? It shouldn't be rationally possible. But because it's happening, this is a strong proof in and of itself. It also, ijma can be reactionary many times, right? So an issue comes up and then you have a consensus of scholars that respond to it. This is very key. This is very important to help us understand some of the issues that we're going to talk about. So the structure of the prayer. Is there anybody who puts the ruku' before the sujood? In any method? No, right? The structure of the prayer is shared. What is the difference on whether I should raise my hands, where I should place my hands, should I leave my hands to my side, right? The things I say between when I make takbir and I say Fatiha, right? These are the differences that you have. But in general, the structure is something that is shared by everyone, by all Muslims. So there's no difference in that. The women being head of the state, we said that there is ijma on this. So is this ijma valid or not? And if it is, why is it? If it isn't, why isn't it? If we remember, and this is, remember I said that reaction was something that's really important. Yes. لا يفلح قوما يعني قادتهم المرأة or something like this, right? So there's a nation will not succeed that has a woman as its leader. Huh? He meant specifically, yeah, he meant specifically the ruler that was placed of the Persian Empire at the time. I mean, that's fine. I have no problem with that. I'm not here to talk in the hadith. We can talk about. Like, I have no problem talking about that. The question, you have ijma on this issue. Is the ijma valid or not? Again, sure.
There are two ways.
Huh?
There are two ways. First, if you accept ijma as a source,
Yeah.
First point, and second, was there really ijma?
Yeah.
According to those who accept.
Yes and yes.
Yes.
Was it a problem that they faced? Was it ever an issue where like they were like, oh man, we have a choice between Umar and Aisha. What do we do? Do you understand what I'm asking? Was it ever a practical issue that was faced in the history of Islam? Yes. There were. So practically it happened, right? Practically it happened. And some of those nation states actually did okay. Like they didn't fail. So this gives us understanding to the hadith, but it also helps us qualify that there are times and cases where ijma is not valid. Why? Because for someone to chime in on this issue, it means that they would have to have what? Actually dealt with it and faced it. And I'm not here to say, oh, I support it or I'm against it. That's not the discussion. The discussion is on there are times and cases where we can actually challenge ijma. Another example, 2 khutbahs for the Eid prayer. 2 khutbahs for the Eid prayer. There's no challenge to this. Nobody challenged this, except when? Except in the modern era. It's only in the modern era that this has been challenged, saying that the Eid khutbah is not like the Jummah khutbah. Therefore, the Eid khutbah needs to be 1. طيب. What do we do with that? So the people who say it's 1, how do we respond to them? Okay, we say they're wrong. All right, good. What else? Why, but someone will be like, okay, why am I wrong? It's not Jummah. Why do you need 2 khutbahs for Eid? It's not even an obligation, it's a sunnah. Uh-huh.
1, 2, and 3. What's the big deal?
So that's not the question is. The question is, I want you guys to pay attention, is that there is ijma, that there are 2 khutbahs for Eid, and the people who challenge it, on what grounds can they challenge it? Is this type of, remember the previous one, I said, hey, we can challenge it because it's not an issue that they face. What is the problem with the two khutbah thing? No, I mean, forget the timing and forget the justification. I'm talking about over here in this situation. How can I challenge the ijma of two khutbahs? Two khutbahs meaning that a person talks, sits down, gets up, and talks again. Just like Jummah. Yeah. On what basis can I challenge it? Right, I'd have to, if I rejected Ijma, it's easy, right? Ijma is not a source, I don't have to do it, but then I'd have a lot more problems. I'd have a lot more issues.
You have to request to show the proof there was.
Okay, but that's the establishment of it, and you can say, okay, well, we've gone 14 centuries, everybody's been giving two khutbahs. On what basis are you giving one? You understand? So remember we were talking about there has to be enough time to pass for somebody to challenge it. For these 14 generations, this is how, and this is a religious function, right? Was there ever a time where the Eid was not made? There was never a time where the Eid wasn't made. There was always an Eid khutbah that was given. And there was enough time to pass for scholars to say like, hey, we don't need a second khutbah. So one khutbah is enough. How is it that now in the modern era, you have a handful of people who are challenging this? It doesn't make sense. Another example, yes.
So what is this? So if it's not based on, all the scholars, it's not based on evidence from the Quran. So if that's the case, then why does it matter if they ever face the issue or not? He's making evidence.
Sure. No, it not only is it based on, but remember, we said it helps us in the application.
Okay.
Right? So in this situation, do we have any clear hadith that talk about the number of Eid khutbahs?
No.
We don't. Yeah. Oh, it's not about the Eid. Okay. Yeah.
You can challenge it. It's not.
Yeah.
An issue they never faced.
Yes.
I'm saying, why? Why does that matter?
Oh, why does it matter?
Yeah, it's not based on evidence, so it doesn't matter if you face the issue, you have evidence, then that's.
Because remember, and that's an excellent point. So over here, basically what Abdul Razak is positing is like, okay, well, if Ijma is based on the Quran and Sunnah, why does it matter whether people face that issue or not, correct? Right? Because we said that Ijma helps us in application and understanding. And if there's no place for me to apply this, and there's no place for me to understand it, how can I use it to help me understand the Quran and Sunnah? And I'm not, like I said, I'm not saying the ruling is wrong, but I'm saying that there are people, would they have grounds to challenge it? I think so. I think so. And that's where that importance would come in. That, okay, well, you're in a space now where not just that, even the hadith that talk about it, and this is where we can start talking about it. Do we really find historically that nations that have been led by women to fail? I mean, they haven't failed any more than male-driven states. I mean, very honestly, did the Prophet, now, is it possible the Prophet was wrong? No. Right, that's not a possibility. Or what does it mean to fail? Right, and that's all of these discussions are very real and they're very possible. But the question now comes in, all right, now we understand, all right, there's a caveat to the understanding of the hadith. There has to be more to it. And the Ijma is only pushing to one understanding, but that understanding practically is not working. So what do we do? And that's why I feel there's reason to challenge and push back. The two khutbah, wearing circular jewelry. I don't know if are you guys familiar with this? So basically there's a modern scholar who uses some hadith, and the hadith there's a huge difference of opinion on. Most scholars saying that they're weak, saying that a woman cannot wear circular jewelry, like a bangle that's made out of gold, or hoop earrings, even those. These are all impermissible. Tayyib. How can we challenge this scholar? Your rings? No, take it off. How do we challenge it? Historical context, okay. What are we using now? Yeah. He has a hadith.
Is it because the proponents say it eliminates noise and it refracts?
No, gold. Circular gold jewelry, rings, bangles, hoop earrings, necklaces. No, I mean, if gold is permissible for women, then why does it matter what shape it is? Does that add to the extravagance? Huh? He's being cheap? I hope that's not the reason. There's Ijma on this issue. Is it possible historically that there was a time where women didn't wear circular jewelry?
Yeah.
There was a time?
I don't think people recorded that. Like,
No, but here, listen. Historically, did Muslim women wear circular jewelry?
Yeah.
Is it possible that we discovered today that they can't? Does that make sense? No. You're telling me 14 centuries have passed before somebody realized that women can't wear gold jewelry or circular gold jewelry? So what does that tell us? It's that there's ijma on the permissibility of them wearing it. Otherwise, somebody would have said something before. Firstly, who? The ones who recorded the hadith, right? The one who's writing it down and recording it in his book, would he not say something? Like, hey, women, stop wearing circular gold jewelry. There's a problem here. But we don't find that. And like I said, and to support that tells us, number one, the standard of the hadith, that it's weak. And secondly, what else is it? It helps us understand the ijma in this situation. Otherwise, scholars would have challenged it. And they would have said that this was an issue and this was a problem. So the establishment of ijma, this is something that is really problematic. Because you have a whole bunch of people claiming that there's ijma on the subject, that there's consensus on the subject. And sometimes you will have claims that vary from madhab to madhab. How do you establish it? This requires a lot of study of history, a lot of actually going back and seeing what different scholars said on different issues and seeing if there's somebody who challenged those particular issues. Even the methods that what's established and the types of ijma, there are different types. I don't want to spend too much time on this because we can spend a lot of time on ijma. We can spend a lot of time on consensus because there's ijma haqiqi, ijma sukuti. Sometimes there's different, even the types of ijma, like is it actually established or is it not, like ijma yaqini wa dhanni. These are things and these are topics I really don't want to get into. I just wanted to get into the point I wanted to drive across is that ijma, consensus, is an authority in Islam. If you take away anything, that's what I want you to take away from this. And it helps us give context and understand our religion. Inshallah, next week we'll talk about the legal authority and importance of qiyas. And it's a good discussion. It's a good discussion, just like I hope the Ijma one was. And then from there, inshallah, we are going to move forward and move on and talk about bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, how to actually deal with the nusus, how to deal with the Quran, deal with the Sunnah, and extract rulings from them. And Allah knows best. Allahu a'lam, sallallahu alaihi wa sallam, Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sallam. Inshallah, it's almost time for salah. Can you give this to Mahmoud? Mahmoud. Alaikum salam. Hello, what's up, man?
This is like, what are you doing with this? I'm taking it home.
No, give it to Mahmoud.